The dust in the attic was always the worst part. It swirled in the slants of afternoon light like old ghosts as Travis and I heaved the heavy steamer trunk toward the far wall. My daughter Maggie had been on me for months to finally clear this space out. "See, Dad?" Travis grunted, wiping his brow with the back of his arm. "He's a good man, solid. Not so bad? We'll have this sorted before Maggie gets home with the pizza." I nodded, coughing a little. "Just a bunch of my old life in boxes, son. Nothing exciting." As Travis slid the trunk flush against the cedar siding, something small and dark, no bigger than a checkbook, skittered out from beneath it. It slid to a stop against the toe of his work boot. "What's this?" he muttered, bending to pick it up. My heart, which had been beating a steady, dusty rhythm, simply stopped. I knew. I knew the shape, the worn navy blue color, even from 10 feet away in the dim light. A cold wave washed over me, so intense I felt the sweat on my back turn to ice. He brushed the cover clean with his thumb. It was a passport. He flipped it open, his eyes scanning the photo page. The seconds stretched into eternity. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just watched his face. The confusion was instant, a slight crinkle between his eyebrows. Then his eyes flicked from the photo to me, then back to the booklet in his hands. The confusion hardened into something else, something slow and dawning. Suspicion. In his hands was a piece of me I had buried for 25 years. A 1998 Canadian passport, issued to a man who didn't exist, Robert Thorne. And staring up from the page, younger, with darker hair and a gaze that hadn't yet seen all it would see, was me. Travis didn't say a word. He just stood there, frozen in the dusty sunlight, holding my secret. Then, very slowly, he lifted his head and looked not at me, but toward the attic door, as if he was already thinking about going downstairs, about finding Maggie, about asking the question that had just been dropped into our quiet, ordinary afternoon. The question I had prayed would never be asked. The sun's just starting to dip behind the bitter roots, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. From this old rocking chair on the porch, I can see the whole valley, my valley. 18 years of watching evenings just like this one. I hear the screen door slap shut. "Brought you some tea, Dad." It's Maggie, my daughter. She sets the mug on the little table beside me, the steam curling up into the cool mountain air. "Thank you, darling." My voice is rough, like gravel, same as it's always been. She leans against the porch rail, looking out at the land. Her husband, Travis, is down by the barn, checking on a mare that's due to foal any day now. Good man. Works hard. He fits here, which is all I ever wanted for her. "You're quiet tonight," Maggie says, giving me that soft smile that reminds me so much of her mother. "Just content," I tell her, and it's the truth. This peace, it's a real thing. It's in the smell of cut hay, in the distant sound of the creek, in the solid feel of this worn wooden porch under my boots. Folks in town know me as Wyatt, the retired rancher who minds his own business, who can still gentle a spooked horse better than anyone. The man who showed up here with a young daughter half a lifetime ago, bought this patch of land with cash, and got to work. They respect the life I've built. They don't ask questions. And I don't offer answers. Maggie sips her own tea. Travis was saying at dinner how Mr. Higgins over at the feed store was going on again about that stallion you trained for him back in '09. Says you're a miracle worker. I let out a short breath, almost a laugh. No miracle, just patience and listening. Horse tells you what it needs if you're quiet enough to hear it. That's the philosophy I've lived by here. Be quiet, listen, do your work well. 'Cause no trouble. It's a simple ledger, and for 18 years the balance has been good. Inside the house, in a locked metal box tucked behind a loose floorboard in my bedroom closet, is the only artifact from my life before this porch, before this silence. A small blue booklet, a 1998 Canadian passport. The face in the photo is younger, the eyes harder, but it's me. The name printed beside it isn't. I never look at it. But I know it's there. It's the lock on the door to the past. And I have thrown away the key. Maggie puts a hand on my shoulder, bringing me back to the now, to the lavender twilight. You cold? I can grab a blanket. I'm perfect right here, I say, and I cover her hand with mine. This is my life. The man I was before doesn't exist. There's only this chair, this land, my daughter's hand on my shoulder, and the deepening quiet of a Montana night. It's all I need. The air in Maggie's kitchen felt different the moment Travis walked in. It was usually a place for coffee and ranch gossip, but he had this look in his eyes like he'd found a loose thread and couldn't help but pull. I was out fixing the north fence, completely unaware my past was about to be laid out on my daughter's kitchen table. "Got a question for you, Mags," Travis said, his voice too casual. He didn't sit, just pulled a slim, dark blue booklet from his jacket and placed it down with a soft tap. Maggie wiped her hands on a dish towel, frowning. "What's that?" "Found it tucked in a box of your dad's old tax files he lent me for the shed permits. Must have gotten mixed in." He flipped it open. "Says it's a Canadian passport, issued 1998. Name here says Robert Thorne." I can just imagine my Maggie's face then. Confused. A little annoyed at Travis going through things. "So, some old passport. Look at the picture, Maggie." She told me later that's when her stomach dropped. She leaned in, and there I was, or a version of me, 20 years younger, my hair darker, but my eyes, she said, were exactly the same. That steady look I get when I'm thinking hard. Only in that picture I wasn't Wyatt, the Montana rancher. I was someone named Robert Thorne. "That's Dad," she said, but it came out flat, more statement than question. "Sure looks like him," Travis agreed, watching her closely. "Who's Robert Thorne?" Her defense came up like a shield. She's always been fiercely loyal. "I don't know. A mistake, a fake ID from before I was born. It's none of our business, Travis. And it's sure none of yours." She pushed the passport back across the table toward him. "Just drop it, okay? Put it back where you found it and forget you saw it." Travis picked it up, sliding it back into his pocket, but he didn't nod. That quiet curiosity was already hooked in him. "He ever talk about life before here? Before Montana?" "He talked about missing good maple syrup and how Canadians say sorry too much," Maggie snapped, crossing her arms. "That's it. He's my dad. This is his home. End of story." But it wasn't the end. As she watched him leave, Maggie felt a cold unease settle in her chest. And Travis, his curiosity now a live thing, didn't go back to work. He drove into town. I learned later he started at the diner, then the feed store, his questions subtle, wrapped in friendly chatter. "Wyatt's been here, 20 years? Wonder what brought a man like him all the way out here." He was digging, gently turning over the soil of my quiet life, looking for the roots of a man who didn't exist. And I was out on the range, thinking the biggest threat to my peace was a broken fence line, not a forgotten passport in my own daughter's hands. The dust from the feed store parking lot hadn't even settled before the trouble started. I was over by the corral, checking a fence post, when I saw Travis's truck come barreling down our lane, kicking up a plume of dry earth. He didn't have his usual easy wave. His face was set in a hard line. He found me and Maggie by the barn. "We need to talk. Now." Maggie shot me a look, her eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen since she was a little girl. My stomach dropped. "Travis, what's this about?" "It's about Clint," Travis said, his voice low and strained. He took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. "I ran into him at the feed store. I was just making conversation, asking about that quarter-horse bloodline you've been breeding. Casual stuff." I stayed silent, my blood turning cold. "Clint pulled me aside," Travis continued, his eyes darting to Maggie, then back to me. "Said he's heard whispers, that a man who shows up out of nowhere buys a failing spread and turns it around this fast. Well, he said a man like that usually has a past he's running from. He implied, strongly, that maybe the right people in law enforcement should start taking an interest." The world narrowed to the worried crease between Maggie's brows. Clint, that jealous, petty man. He'd always hated my success, my peace. He'd been looking for a crack in my foundation for years. "Travis, you know Clint's full of hot air," I started, but he cut me off. "Do I, Wyatt?" he asked, and the doubt in his voice was a physical blow. He was specific. He said whispers. What is he whispering about? He turned to Maggie, his expression pained but firm. "Maggie, honey, I love you. But I have a family to think about, my kids. If your dad brought danger here—" "There's no danger," Maggie cried out, but her voice wavered. She was thinking of the passport, the locked box in my desk, the ghost of Robert Thorne. Travis saw her hesitation. It was all the confirmation he needed. The pressure tightened. "I need the truth, Wyatt. For her sake. For all our sakes. If Clint's talking to the sheriff next time instead of just me, what then?" I looked at my daughter's pale face, at the good man she loved now caught in the crossfire of my old life. Clint had thrown a stone into still water, and the ripples were reaching everyone I cared about. The peaceful life I'd built board by board was shuddering, and I didn't know if I could shore it up fast enough. The past wasn't just knocking at my door anymore. Clint was handing it a crowbar. The silence in my workshop was heavy, the kind that comes before a storm. I was oiling a leather bridle when Maggie stepped inside. She didn't say hello. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She just stood there, holding the door frame like she needed it to stay upright. "I know you heard us talking last night," she finally said, her voice thin and strained, "about the passport." I set the bridle down slowly, wiping my hands on a rag. My heart felt like an old, cold stone in my chest. This was the moment I'd dreaded for 25 years. "I did," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "Who is Robert Thorne, Dad?" The question was a plea, not an accusation. "Is it you?" "Please just tell me the truth." I looked at my daughter, at the fear and confusion in her eyes, the eyes that used to light up when I'd lift her onto my old quarter horse. The lie I'd built my life around was crumbling, and she was caught in the dust. I felt a sadness so profound it was almost peaceful. The running was over. "It is me," I said, the admission leaving me like a long-held breath. "But Maggie, it's not what you think. I never hurt anyone. I swear to you." She took a shaky step forward. "Then why? Why the fake name? Why all the secrets?" "It's a long story. A story from a life I left behind." I reached out, but let my hand fall, not wanting to scare her. "I want to tell you. I need to tell you. But I need to tell Clint, too." Her eyes widened. "Clint? Why?" "Because he's part of this now," I said, trying to sound calm. "The suspicion, it's poisoning everything. I won't have it poisoning you, please. Ask him to come here tonight. Let me speak to you both together. Then you can decide what you think of me." She searched my face, looking for the father she knew in the eyes of the stranger I'd just confessed to being. Finally, she gave a single, tight nod. "Tonight," she whispered, before turning and walking out, leaving me alone with the ghosts I'd invited back to my table. Across town, Clint was sitting across from Sheriff Miller in the small, sunlit office. He leaned forward, his demeanor all earnest concern. "I just worry about Maggie, Sheriff," Clint said, shaking his head. "This Robert Thorne, I found a passport, a forgery, 1998 Canadian. It's got Wyatt's picture, but he's decades younger. It doesn't add up. What if he's some kind of fugitive? What if Maggie's in danger?" Sheriff Miller, a broad man who'd shared more than one quiet coffee with me at the diner, leaned back in his creaky chair. He studied Clint the way he studied a nervous horse, patiently, looking for the tell. "Wyatt's been here 15 years, Clint. He's the most solid man I know in this county. Pays his taxes, fixes the school's fence every fall for free." "That's what makes it so perfect for hiding," Clint pressed, his voice dropping. "All I'm asking is for you to look into the name, quietly, for Maggie's sake." The sheriff sighed, rubbing his jaw. He didn't like gossip, and he liked Clint's insinuating tone even less. But the law was the law, and a forged passport was a serious thing. "All right," he said finally, his voice gravelly with reluctance. "I'll make a few discreet inquiries. But you let me handle this, you understand? No more amateur sleuthing, and you keep this between us for now." Clint's smile was thin and satisfied as he stood. "Of course, Sheriff. I just want what's best for everyone." As Clint left, Sheriff Miller stared at the closed door, a deep frown on his face. He pulled a notepad toward him, wrote down the name Robert Thorne, and circled it slowly, hoping like hell his friend had a good explanation. The smell of Maggie's meatloaf still hung in the air when the knock came. It wasn't a friendly tap. It was the solid, authoritative rap of the sheriff's fist on my front door. My blood went cold. Through the kitchen window, I saw the outline of his cruiser in the drive, and further back, parked under the old oak by the road, the familiar silhouette of Clint's pickup. He wasn't even hiding. He was just watching, waiting for the show. Maggie looked from me to the door, her eyes wide with a confusion that cut me deeper than any accusation. "Dad?" she whispered. "It's okay, honey," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. The truth, which I'd carried like a stone for decades, suddenly felt like it was going to burst out of me. I couldn't let Clint's poisoned version get to the sheriff first. I had to control this. I walked to the door and opened it. Sheriff Miller stood there, his hat in his hands. a look of polite apology on his weathered face that didn't reach his eyes. "Evening, Wyatt. Sorry to bother you at supper time. Mind if I come in for a friendly chat?" "Of course, Tom," I said, stepping back. The friendly chat line was the oldest one in the book. Maggie hovered in the doorway to the living room, a silent, worried shadow. We stood in the foyer, an awkward triangle. The sheriff cleared his throat. "Wyatt, I've had a curious piece of information come across my desk. I'm sure it's nothing, but I've got to ask. You understand?" He paused, his gaze steady on mine. "Does the name Robert Thorne mean anything to you?" The air left the room. I could feel Maggie's stare burning into the side of my face. Outside, I knew Clint was leaning forward in his truck seat, grinning. This was his move. He'd taken whatever half-truth or rumor he'd dug up and laid it right on the sheriff's lap. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I looked at Maggie, seeing the trust in her eyes beginning to fracture under the weight of this strange name. I thought of the forged passport, that 1998 Canadian document with my younger face staring back under the alias Robert Thorne, locked in my desk upstairs. A relic of a life I'd buried. The sheriff shifted his weight, waiting. He was a good man, but he had a job to do. I took a deep, shuddering breath. The time for hiding was over. If I didn't speak now, Clint's version would become the truth. "It does mean something to me, Tom," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "and I think you and Maggie both need to hear what it means. Why don't we sit down?" This was it. The story was coming out, here in my own home, on my terms. Not in a whisper from Clint's venomous mouth, but from me. I just prayed, looking at my daughter's pale, frightened face, that it wouldn't destroy the life I'd built in the telling. The silence in that dusty office was so thick I could feel it pressing against my eardrums. Clint's smug accusation still hung in the air like gun smoke, and I could see the doubt clouding the sheriff's eyes as he looked from the passport in his hand to me. Maggie was rigid beside me, a statue of pure tension. I had one shot. "Sheriff," I said, my voice sounding calmer than I felt. "Before you make any decisions, I'd like a moment, please." He studied me, then gave a single, slow nod, stepping back slightly but not relinquishing his grip on the little blue booklet. I turned to face my daughter, then Travis, and finally the sheriff again, making sure my gaze included them all. This wasn't just for the law. This was for my family. "The passport," I began, nodding toward it. "It's real. The document itself is genuine." I let that fact settle, seeing the confusion deepen on Travis's face. "But the story behind it? It isn't what Clint thinks. It's not what he's selling you." I could feel Maggie's eyes on me, wide and pleading. I gave her the smallest, most reassuring look I could muster. This was the gamble. "I'm done with whispers and shadows," I said, raising my voice just enough to fill the room. "I propose a meeting, tomorrow, at the town hall. I will explain everything, publicly, where everyone can hear the same story at the same time." I took a deliberate pause, making sure my next words landed with absolute clarity. "Invite Clint. He's so eager for the truth. Let him come. Let him hear it firsthand, with the whole town as witness." The sheriff's eyebrows shot up. Travis blinked, caught completely off guard. This wasn't the reaction of a guilty man trying to flee. This was the move of someone trying to take back control. "You do that?" the sheriff asked, skepticism warring with curiosity. "I will," I said, holding his gaze. The story of that passport, of Robert Thorne, it's mine to tell, not his to twist. Let him bring his malice into the light for once instead of spreading it in the dark. It was a huge risk, putting myself on a public stage with all my past laid bare. But I saw the alternative, a life forever running from Clint's poison narratives, with Maggie always looking over her shoulder. This was my stand, not with my fists, but with the truth. However ugly it was mine. And tomorrow, I'd use it to finally trap the man who'd been hunting me for decades, right in the middle of the town square. The air in the town hall was thick with the smell of old wood and judgment. Every seat was filled, every eye was on Clint, who stood at the front with that smug, victorious look I'd come to know too well. He'd painted me as a criminal, a fugitive hiding in plain sight, and the whispers in the room agreed with him. My daughter, Maggie, sat rigid beside me, her hand a tight fist in her lap. I could feel her fear, and it was that fear that finally pushed me to my feet. A hush fell, sharper than before. Clint's smirk didn't fade, it just grew more condescending. He thought I was standing to plead. He was wrong. I didn't say a word at first. I just reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled it out. The little blue booklet with the faded gold embossing. I held it high so the overhead light caught the crest of the 1998 Canadian passport. I saw Clint's eyes lock onto it, that gotcha gleam flashing. "This," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden quiet, "is not a fugitive's document." I let that hang for a beat, seeing the confusion start to replace the certainty in the faces around me. "It's a souvenir." I looked from Clint to the sheriff, who was watching me with a guarded, professional stillness. "For 20 years I didn't disappear. I lived in Alberta, Canada. But my name wasn't Wyatt. It was Robert Thorne." I tapped the passport's cover. This alias was my legend. I was part of a joint task force, working undercover to dismantle a cross-border operation. Cattle rustling, smuggling. It was bigger than anyone here could imagine. Robert Thorne was a quiet, reclusive investor from back east, perfect for getting close to the money men. I could see Maggie staring up at me, her eyes wide, her knuckles white. I gave her the smallest nod I could manage. "It's okay." When the operation was over, the ring broken, I was given a choice, I continued, addressing the whole room now. "A new identity for my safety and my family's, a clean slate somewhere far away. I took it, but I kept this." I lowered the passport, looking at the younger version of myself staring out from its pages. A reminder of the life and the man I had to leave behind. I chose Montana for my fresh start because I wanted honesty. I wanted open skies and a community where a man is what he does, not what he once pretended to be. The silence that followed was absolute. The stunned crowd just stared. Clint's smirk was gone, replaced by a baffled, furious scowl. He looked to the sheriff, seeking denial. Slowly, the sheriff stood. He didn't look at Clint. He looked at me, his gaze thoughtful, weighing my words against a memory. He gave a slow, single nod. "The broad outlines," he said, his voice carrying authority, "fit with some old classified bulletins I saw a long time ago. The kind you don't forget, but you don't talk about." That was all the confirmation the room needed. The energy shifted. a collective release of breath. The villain wasn't the quiet rancher with a secret. He was the man who'd tried to weaponize it. I finally sat down, the weight of 2 decades lifting from my shoulders, and Maggie's hand found mine, holding on tight. The silence in the diner was so thick you could hear the coffee percolator sighing in the kitchen. All eyes were on me, on Clint, on the worn passport I'd just laid bare on the counter. I felt Maggie's hand, warm and steady, on my shoulder. Then Clint moved. He shoved his chair back so hard it screeched against the linoleum, his face a thundercloud of purple rage. "He's lying!" he spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "All of it! A convenient story for a man with a forged document. You expect us to believe this? This fairy tale?" His voice was loud, desperate, trying to fill the room with his anger. But the room wasn't having it. The folks here had just heard 20 years of my life laid out, the sacrifice, the silence. They were looking at him now, and the look wasn't friendly. That's when Sheriff Hayes turned. He didn't shout. He just hooked his thumbs in his belt, his gaze level and cool as a mountain lake. "Funny you should be so invested, Clint," he said, his voice cutting through the diner's hush. "Those cattle-rustling rings Wyatt here helped the feds break up all those years ago. Your cousin Dale was convicted in that same operation, wasn't he? Did a 5-year stretch upstate." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw old man Jensen nod slowly, remembering. The sheriff took a single step forward. "Seems to me," he continued, his words dropping like stones, "you've been holding a grudge against the wrong man for a very, very long time." And just like that, it was over. The last piece clicked into place. This wasn't about me being a stranger. This was about an old, festering family shame that Clint had decided to pin on the quiet newcomer. The town's respect for me, which had been growing as I spoke, solidified right then into something deeper, a quiet, firm admiration. They saw the cost. But for Clint, they saw only the petty, vengeful smallness of it all. The bluster drained from his face, leaving behind something pale and hollow. He looked from the sheriff's disappointed eyes to the stony faces of his neighbors, the ranchers, the shopkeepers, the people whose good opinion he'd always craved. There was nothing there for him. No alliance, no shared suspicion, just a wall of cold, clear understanding. He didn't say another word. Shoulders slumping, he turned and walked to the door, his boots making a lonely, hollow sound on the floor. He didn't slam it. He just pulled it open and slunk out into the afternoon sun, leaving behind the wreckage of his reputation. The door swung shut with a soft sigh, and in that quiet, I finally took a full, clean breath. It was over. He was gone. And I was home. The Montana air was clean and cool, a week's worth of peace having settled into the bones of this old ranch. I sat on the porch swing, the gentle creak of familiar song, with Maggie tucked under my arm and Travis in the chair opposite us. Between us, on the rough-hewn pine table, it lay, the forged 1998 Canadian passport, open to the page with my younger, stranger's face staring back. The alias Robert Thorne seemed like a line from a book I'd read long ago. Travis leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and the look on his face was one I recognized. The weight of a hard truth finally shouldered. "Wyatt," he began, his voice quieter than the breeze. "I need to say I'm sorry for how I was. The distrust. It wasn't right. I watched him, this good man who loved my daughter, I saw the protectiveness that had fueled his suspicion, and there was no anger left in me to meet it, only understanding. "You were protecting my daughter," I said, and a genuine smile found its way to my lips. It felt easy. I can respect that. Hell, I'd have done the same. Maggie squeezed my hand, her head resting on my shoulder. That simple pressure said everything. Reaching out, I placed my hand flat on the open passport, covering that young man's anxious eyes. The laminate was cool, but the gesture felt warm, final. "This," I said, my gaze moving from Travis to Maggie, and then out to the sprawling land that was finally, truly home, was a ghost, a shadow I carried. Now, I lifted my hand, leaving the document exposed but powerless. Now it's just a story, one I don't have to tell alone in the dark anymore. The relief wasn't a shout. It was a deep, settling silence. The secret wasn't a boulder on my chest. It was just a tale, its burden shared and dissolved by the people who mattered. The family I had wasn't just close. It was woven together with a new, unbreakable thread of truth. As if on cue, the sky began to bleed color. The sunset over the plains wasn't just orange and pink. It was a furnace of gold and purple, painting the undersides of the scattered clouds in fiery hues. It washed over the porch, gilding the table, the passport, and our faces in its gentle ending light. I sat back, Maggie's weight against me, a perfect anchor. Travis nodded, a quiet peace in his own eyes. The ghost was gone. All that remained was the land, the sky, and the family right here on this porch. The story was over, and for the first time in decades, I was simply here, watching the day end, perfectly and completely at peace.